Just going to give folks a couple minutes to get into the virtual room. Hello, friends, old and new. Welcome to everybody. I'd like to see those waving hands and smiling faces. My name is Mary Hannah. If you don't know me already, I'm with Meta Peace Team, and I am joined here by Melody Arnst, who is helping with technology, also from MPT, and our guest speaker, Huwaida Arraf. Hopefully I said your name correctly. I mean, it's been one of those times where I was like, I've known you for so long, it never occurred to me to check on pronunciation. It is wonderful to have, we have a bunch of new people joining us tonight, and that's wonderful. As people who know MPT know, our whole foundation is based on nonviolence and a respect for the sacred interconnectedness of all life. And it's through the actions and support and participation of people like all of you that make that possible. And we're really excited to bring to the virtual table here Huwaida, who has been a friend and a guide to MPT for many years. She has been one of those bastions of nonviolent action that has been there since as long as I can remember being part of MPT and working on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Huwaida is a Palestinian-American human rights attorney, and as I've already told you, a really powerful, passionate activist, and a great mom too. Wait till you see her with her kids sometime. She has been involved in legal and grassroots initiatives for Palestinian rights for over 20 years. And she has also, as you may not be surprised to learn, been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize as she co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, the Free Gaza movement. She was on the Freedom Flotilla. She has literally story after story after story of real life on the ground in the trenches experience to talk about. And she was also, if that's not badge of honor enough, a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives for the 10th Congressional District, which shows not only does she care about Palestinian rights, but all human rights, and making sure they come to the front of our daily lives at all times. So it's my honor and privilege to present, not prevent, Huwaida Arraf.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you all for being here. Allow me to apologize for having to wear a mask. As I explained to Mary and Melody, I have undergone a couple of jaw surgeries, and my face is still swollen, so I'm not quite comfortable exposing that yet. But hopefully you can hear me okay. If anyone has an issue, please let me know, and I'll try to speak louder and clearer. So thank you again for being here. And I really want to thank Meta Peace Team for organizing this event, and really for all your incredible work for peace and justice in our communities, not just here, but around the world. It is bittersweet to be with you today. As many of you know, today marks the 75th anniversary of the Palestinian Nakba, which is, Nakba, for those who don't know, means literally catastrophe. And it's important to recognize that the Nakba, or the catastrophe, is not just a moment in time for Palestinians, but it's an ongoing catastrophe of violence, settler colonialism, and really moral failing. And while I don't want to spend too much time on history, briefly noting the Nakba and what happens is important, because Palestinians are frequently denied their narratives. This has been happening to me for a while, and recently was highlighted just here in the Metro Detroit area in an incident that I might talk about later that took place at Bloomfield Hills High School. But again, denied our narrative. And when you're hearing, if you hear about the Nakba, or recently over the last few days, you hear about, how it's anti-Semitic for Palestinians to be decrying and calling a catastrophe the founding of the state of Israel, which, puts this into the context of what, Israel and Israelis want you to hear, completely ignoring the fact that the Nakba for Palestinians meant the destruction and depopulating of over 500 Palestinian towns and villages. It meant the exile, the dispossession of 750,000 Palestinians. It means dozens of massacres, about 70 recorded massacres that took place during that time around 1947 to 1949, in which 15,000 Palestinians were killed. And it marks where Israel created a state over 78% of our historic homeland. And, and that state was recognized and it's now revered as, on the other side, the Palestinians, the indigenous people of the land, have been called everything from, violent to terrorist to you name it, for considering this a catastrophe in our history, to continuing to struggle and call for our freedom and our right to live in self-determination. And so, while I don't want to, again, unless there are questions later, I won't go into too much history. I will here recommend, if you want to learn more about the details of what happened in the creation of the state of Israel and the depopulation and the exile that I talked about, there's a great book by actually an Israeli historian. His name is Ilan Pappé, and the book is called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Ilan Pappé goes into Israeli archival records, goes into the diaries of Israeli generals and the founders of the state to put together this historical accounting of what happened, and to show that Palestine was deliberately ethnically cleansed of its population. So right now, most of Palestinians live actually outside of Palestine, but we do have Palestinians still living, obviously, in historic Palestine, as well as in the West Bank and Gaza. After the Nakba, when Israel was created, over 78% of our historic homeland, the 22%, which is the West Bank and Gaza, came under Jordanian and Egyptian rule, respectively. Now that changed in 1967. Although there is, debate about what happened in 1967, there isn't much debate that Israel launched the first attack against Egypt, igniting what is called the Arab-Israeli War, or the Six-Day War. Israel, in 6 days, defeated 3 Arab armies, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, and then occupied the West Bank and Gaza. So had, as well as the Sinai and the Golan. The Sinai was since given back, but Israel still occupies the Golan, still occupies the West Bank and Gaza. And the Palestinians that continue to live in this territory live at best as second-class citizens, and those are the small number of Palestinians that were able to remain in what became Israel, and my family is part of that. My father is from a village in the Galilee near Akka, and the Palestinians that remain there now, they number about 1.7 to 2 million that live inside Israel as Israeli citizens. I say at best, we are second-class citizens. There are at least 60 laws on the books, with more legislated every day, that discriminate against Palestinians, not affording us the same rights because we are not Jewish. We are Christians and we are Muslims. My father's village specifically is an all-Christian village, but we are Christian and we are Muslims, and therefore there are specific laws that, again, discriminate against us, extending from things like making it, imposing repercussions on Palestinian schools that teach Palestinian history, that teach the Nakba, that prevent Palestinians from reuniting with their family members that were kicked out. Meanwhile, any Jew from anywhere in the world really can come to the state of Israel and claim automatic citizenship and get perks for that. That we have Palestinian villages that these villagers and these villages, they pay their taxes, they're subjected to the laws of the state, but they get no services from the state. You have Palestinian villages that Israel has repeatedly attempted to wipe out, meaning demolishing their villages over and over again, so that these people are living in makeshift shacks because they refuse to leave, and yet Israel repeatedly comes in and demolishes the shacks, and the people are left with nothing but to try to rebuild again. And those are just, 3 or 4 of some of the laws. There are laws that that authorize communities to have, and mainly these are exclusively Jewish communities, that to have committees that can decide that you are not suitable to live in their community. And this is used specifically to say that Arab Palestinian citizens are not suitable to live in certain communities. So it's sanctioned discrimination, another form of sanctioned discrimination against Palestinians. And that's the best case scenario for the Palestinian citizens of Israel. We are at best a barely tolerated minority. But then you go into the West Bank and Gaza, where, let me start with the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where Israel has been systematically trying to capture more and more land with less and less people on it. So what does that mean? That means squeezing Palestinians into smaller and smaller areas of land in the hopes to eventually get rid of as many as possible, so that Israel can control all of the land. So you have in the West Bank about 750 of the latest count Israeli settlers that live in approximately 250 illegal settlements across the West Bank. And if you've never seen a settlement, that's a mild term for it. It is basically a colony that is for Jews only, that is built on confiscated Palestinian land, that uses confiscated water resources. It sits on the hilltops, and then Israel builds wide bypass roads for these settlers to use to get to the other settlements on these hilltops, and to wind around Palestinian villages so that they never have to enter them, but then can go into Israel proper or Jerusalem. And then so the Palestinians are left with their villages that are little pockets that are surrounded by military checkpoints and that are surrounded by settlements. If Palestinians are lucky, the settlements aren't some of the violent ones, but a lot of the settlements and the settlers are ideological settlers, which, who they're allowed to be armed, and that they also carry out attacks against these Palestinian villagers. It translates into a system where you have every aspect of Palestinian life being controlled by the Israeli military. Whether you can move, whether you can go to school, whether you can cross a checkpoint to get the medical care that you need, this is all up to the Israeli military. And it gets even worse in Gaza. In Gaza, Israel used to have settlements in the heart of Gaza. And in 2005, they said that they were unilaterally pulling out. And they told the world that we are pulling out of Gaza. Gaza is no longer occupied. That is not the situation. They pulled their settlers, approximately 9,000 settlers, out of the heart of Gaza. They relocated them in different West Bank settlements, but they continued to completely surround Gaza. Gaza is a strip of land that is slightly smaller than the city of Detroit. 2 million Palestinians live there. It is surrounded and controlled air, sea, and land by Israel. There is one border with Egypt that is indirectly controlled by Israel. It is a joint control between Israel and Egypt, and Egypt doesn't do anything that Israel doesn't approve of. So anything going in and out of Gaza is controlled by Israel. the airspace is controlled by Israel, access to the sea. And so, for example, where Palestinians can fish, because thousands of families in Gaza rely on fishers as their source of livelihood. Generally, most countries have 20 nautical miles where that is theirs, or that they can kind of access. And then so you would think Palestinian fishers can fish in the sea that they have access to, in the Gaza Sea, to fish and gather and sell to the population and feed them. But Israel restricts their access to the sea to somewhere between 3 and 6 nautical miles. That changes depending on who knows, whatever Israel decides that day. And so Palestinian fishers are frequently shot at, their boats are confiscated, some are killed, and those that are not, that are able to fish, are fishing in a very small area, not much fish, and the fish that they are able to gather are swimming in polluted water. Why? Because Israel does not allow Gaza to import the materials that it needs to fix its sewage system. And so you have 110 million liters of partially treated or completely untreated sewage being dumped into the Mediterranean Sea every single day. And human rights organizations have warned of the outbreak of waterborne diseases. But no, in 2012, actually, the UN issued a report saying Gaza will be unlivable by 2020 because of the lack of access to clean, potable water. And we are in 2023, and the world still hasn't done anything about that. The closure of Gaza remains. These living conditions where people can't get in and out without Israeli permission remains. That they nothing to do with their sewage except dumped it into the Mediterranean and have their fishers fishing in this water. The fact that Gaza is only allowed hours of electricity per day. They don't know what it's like to live without electricity cuts for most of the days, and the electricity cuts also applies to hospitals. So how do you run a hospital? How do you operate incubators when your electricity is going out every day? You're relying on generators. If you're able to get generators and their parts, again, depending on what Israel has allowed into Gaza, what Gazans can eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner on any given day is governed by what Israel allows in and out. So it is complete control. And when I was part of running the ships to Gaza for the Free Gaza movement, we were able to get in successfully, which is stories for another day. But one of the things that we did is when we left Gaza, we weren't seeking the permission of Israel. We had very small vessels, and we were able to get in and bring into Gaza journalists, doctors, others to see what is happening there. And we were able to take out of Gaza a very, very, very small number of people, but people that desperately needed to get out. For example, one kid said, he was the first kid we took out of Gaza, 16 years old. He had lost a leg in an Israeli military attack. From the hip down, had his leg amputated. Israel would not allow him to enter Israel to get the medical treatment he needed. There was no prosthetics that he could get in Gaza, and Israel would not give him permission to go anywhere else to get the medical treatment he needed. So we put him in his wheelchair and his father on our boat, and we sailed out of Gaza with him, and he was able to get a prosthetic leg in Europe. But where there is said, there are hundreds and thousands of stories like that of a people that are trapped and feel completely ignored by the rest of the world. And when you hear about Gaza is when Gaza is firing rockets at Israel, right? And then Israel uses that to justify bombing Gaza. So this small strip of land the size of Detroit with 2 million people, it's considered the most densely populated area in the world, has bombs from the most sophisticated military in the region raining down on them, and they have nowhere to flee, nowhere to go because all the borders are closed to them. That is Gaza. And then to give you a little bit of a better than I can do explanation of what daily life is like for Palestinians in the West Bank trying to cross checkpoints or cross borders to get to work, I want to play a small video. It's a poem by a friend of mine put to some video, and I will ask Mary if she can put that on.
It's 3 a.m. in the cattle cage. The line is long and thick with bodies. You wait. A jibneh sandwich with cucumber in a plastic bag clutched in your callous laborer's hand. Your wife prepared your breakfast and your lunch. She was up before you, and together you prayed a pre-dawn salat. She kissed your face and said, Allah ma'ak ya habibi. Allah be with you, my love. You kiss the faces of your sleeping babies. You haven't seen them awake in months, and you wonder, has Walid's voice begun to crack yet? Have Wijdad's hips begun to flare? How big was Suraya's smile when she came home with her report card? It's 4 a.m. in the cattle cage. Still, you wait. The line before you is so long, and behind you now it is longer. Few of you speak. You're packed so damn tight that you hold one another upright. You see your own fatigue reflected in the weariness etched on the faces all around you. You look away, pine for a smoke. But who the hell can afford that? You stare at the graffiti beyond the iron bars holding you in, written just for you, written by Zionist settlers sucking the breath from your lungs. You understand the meaning of their English words, die, sand niggers. Sometimes you pine for that too. It's 5 a.m. in the cattle cage. The soldiers arrive. The line loosens. You take one step forward, propelled by the weight of the bodies behind you. Your jibneh sandwich with cucumber in a plastic bag is crushed. It never survives. It's 7 a.m. in the cattle cage. Now is your turn. You produce your papers, unfold, refold, eyes down, heart down. Your shoes are down on their luck. But you're out of the line now. 15 men before you were pulled aside, and you tried not to look, tried not to hear the one yelling, "Don't hit me." It's 7:30 a.m. on the cattle bus, and you ride. The country they stole from you speeds outside your window, and you imagine the man you would have been. The man you should have been out there riding the family steed, the thoroughbred mares your grandfather raised and nurtured and loved in a Palestine, unraped, unstolen. It's 8 a.m. You get off the cattle bus. Your crushed jibneh sandwich with cucumber in a plastic bag in one hand, your eyes down, your heart down. You put your toolbox down to knock on the Zionist settler's back door where the help goes. But the Zionist settler boss man yells, "Wala, mish hon el-yom." Not there today, boy. And all you can do is thank Allah that your wife and your babies are not there to hear them call you Wala.
So that was the experience. That was Susan kind of narrating the experience of Palestinian laborers who line up in these cattle cages to enter Jerusalem in search for work because the situation demands it. This is what Palestinians have to do to survive. Almost every element of the Palestinian economy is controlled by Israel. Imports and exports all controlled by Israel. And a lot of Palestinians, frankly, need to try to find work inside Israel, but they have to go through these processes for that. And not only for that, sometimes they have, you'll see similar lines and greater at checkpoints of Palestinians lining up to try to go to Jerusalem to pray, whether in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You'll see Palestinians lining up to try to access some hospitals for the medical care that is not available in the West Bank. And they are subjected to the same kind of treatment where they are herded, they are forced to wait for hours, and sometimes they are turned back just because the soldier can turn them back. Students subjected to the same things. And this doesn't only occur between the West Bank and Jerusalem. Sometimes it's going from one West Bank city to the other, where Israelis can set up and flying checkpoints, or they have established checkpoints, again, where they are monitoring and controlling Palestinian movement from one Palestinian city to the other. You really have, as plenty of human rights organizations have now called it, a system of apartheid. It is a horrific system of apartheid. And I believe it was Human Rights Watch that also said Israel is imposing not only a system of apartheid, but also persecution. It's also persecuting the Palestinian people. These are both, apartheid and persecution are crimes against humanity. You have not only Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International said the same, but Israel's largest human rights organization, B'Tselem, also said the same and claimed that Israel is pursuing a system of Jewish supremacy through all the land between the river and the sea. It is virtually unrefutable, unless you want to really ignore what's happening, that this is not only, I said it was, Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza, and we talk about occupation or military occupation, but military occupation is only one aspect of what's happening. It is a settler colonial project that you have in historic Palestine, and you have a system of apartheid that has been in place. So you have occupation and apartheid that are tools used to carry out this settler colonial project. And it is underwritten by the US government, by our tax dollars, and by our silence and complicity. I probably don't have to tell many of you that $3.8 billion of our tax money goes to the Israeli military every single year, and that the United States frequently vetoes any kind or otherwise torpedoes any kind of UN action to hold Israel accountable for its crimes. So Israel thinks that it can operate with impunity, and it continues to impose this system, all under the guise of security. But what they really want is to prevent any kind of movement towards a situation where Palestinians can live free, can live with the same human rights and dignity that Israelis enjoy. Again, it's all done under the guise of security, but what Israel is really trying to convince the world is that it can maintain and it can expect security from the very people that it occupies and oppresses. As if anybody living in the situation that Palestinians are living under wouldn't try to resist. And no matter what shape or form that resistance takes, it is unacceptable for Israel. It is terrorist. It is anti-Semitic. It is trying to drive Israel into the sea, when in reality, Israel has over and over rejected attempts to share the land. Palestinians, some of you might not know this, but the original program of the Palestine Liberation Organization, when shortly after it was founded, was for a secular, singular, democratic state in all of Palestine. That began to change in the mid-70s, and then going into the 80s, trying to convince the PLO leadership of a two-state solution. And then we got into what's called the Oslo peace process, and this idea that Palestinians will establish their state on 22% of their homeland in the West Bank and Gaza. Well, that never came about because during the peace process, Israel continued to build the settlements that we're talking about, and now the settlements are 3- and 4-fold what they were before the Oslo peace process. And again, any attempt Palestinians to protest Israel's actions is deemed as, they are ungrateful, they don't want to negotiate, they're not giving the peace process a chance, they are terrorists, you name it. The good part is, and I'll try to sum up so we can leave time for question and answer, the good thing is that we have so many groups and people like Meta Peace teams, like many churches now across the United States, like many Jewish groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and Not in Our Name, and many others that are working to counter this narrative that has for decades been in the international arena that Israel is the victim. Israel is not the victim here. Israel built its state on a land that had a people and has been working systematically since then to get more of that land with less of the people on it, meanwhile claiming that any kind of resistance to this settler colonial project is an act of terrorism. Unfortunately, world leaders have either been impotent when it comes to doing anything about it, or have been actively engaged in supporting the settler colonial project. But we have civil society. What I have for the decades put my faith in is the power of civil society to mobilize, using the strength and the resilience of the Palestinian people and the connections that have been formed by people that have traveled to the occupied territories or made connections in other ways, and the myriad of organizations and people that have taken the time to learn and that work for peace and justice around the world that have included the Palestinian struggle. And so we are continuing to work to educate. This program has been part of that attempt to continue to spread the word so that we can turn that education into mobilization, because only when we raise our voices loud enough to say that we don't want our tax dollars supporting colonialism, apartheid, and oppression is when, when our voices get loud enough is when our politicians will be forced to pay attention and end its active support. And unfortunately, there are many forces at play here, but I don't think that there is much disagreement that it is the United States' underwriting of Israel's policies, its funding, its protection at the international level, and its its attempt to actively distort what's happening and to erase or silence Palestinians in an attempt to keep Americans from knowing what's happening, that is allowing Israel to continue to operate with impunity. And to end on just this note, if you have seen in the news over the past couple of days, our representative in Michigan, Rashida Tlaib, Palestinian, of course, member of Congress, tried to hold a commemorative event on Capitol Hill to mark the Nakba, to uplift stories of survivors of the Nakba, of which we have in DC and in and around the United States, to uplift those stories, again, recognizing our own history and pain and trauma. And the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, tried to scuttle that by the night before the event, commandeering the event room that she had reserved, and then proceeding to slam Rashida for engaging in anti-Semitic tropes, again, because Palestinian history, we can't have our own history if it conflicts with or counters what the Zionist narrative is. But luckily, Jewish Senator Bernie Sanders reserved another room for Rashida where the commemoration was held. So a loss for McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy there, but Kevin McCarthy, is not alone in this. And on my level, I mentioned briefly, just a couple of months ago, I was invited to speak at a local high school, Bloomfield Hills High School, on the issue of racism and discrimination. I was one of 5 speakers, and I spoke only for a few minutes about growing up Palestinian-American here, and then going over to Palestine and the work that I did there, and leaving the students with a message that all people deserve the same human rights, that I've worked with Jews and people of all religions and all different nationalities to stand alongside Palestinians in their campaign for liberation, for freedom and human rights, because this is not a Palestinian versus Jewish conflict in any way, or Muslim and Christians versus Jews. It's not that, the way that it's portrayed. And I stress that to the students, that some of the most ardent supporters of Palestinian rights have been Jews. And it's important that we not let our identity politics divide us. Sometimes it's used for that. Of course, we should always be proud of our identity and our culture and share that. But when forces try to use that to divide us, we should be conscious of it. We should reject it in realizing that all people are deserving of the same rights that we want for ourselves. And if those kids, those high schoolers that were listening, we can do that in their homes, in their communities, and as they go out into the world, then they would certainly contribute to making this world a much better place for my little ones and for their kids and grandkids. And that message was slammed immediately after the high school program, when Zionist organizations started condemning the school for inviting me to speak. Since then, 2 administrators, the principal of the school and the superintendent of the school district, have lost their jobs, and it continues. This attempt to silence Palestinians, to erase our narrative, and anything we say about our lived experiences and what's happening in Palestine is immediately shut down as anti-Semitic, because Zionists and what they're after can't win an argument based on principles and what's right, because the Zionist project in Palestine is one of colonialism and oppression, and it cannot be justified. And so when they can't justify it, they just try to shut us up by screaming anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a big problem in the United States and around the world. It is a problem that needs to be confronted by all of us in the same way that we are confronting all forms of racism. There's no room for anti-Semitism in the Palestinian movement at all. And when those of us who have long been working on it see it, we call it out, we stop it. We don't want it. We don't want any form of racism and discrimination. And so to turn around and call those of us who are calling out racism and discrimination against Palestinians and to try to pin racism on us is really far-fetched, but unfortunately some people call for it. Some people fall for it. Anyway, our struggle is long, but we have some wonderful allies, and the more that come on board, like you, who listen and can share this information, I think the closer it'll bring us to freedom and justice. Let me end there, if that's okay, and leave time for question and answer.
Huwaida, thank you so much. Everything you say moves me. And, I haven't been there in years. And part of what I'm realizing is so little has changed. And what has changed hasn't necessarily been for the good. So thank you for bringing this really to people's, the front of their mind and their hearts. I have, there's people, please feel free to either raise your hand using the little feature at the bottom of your screen that's for reactions, or you can type a question into chat and we'll read them out loud. I have one question that was asked was, one of the things that we've been encouraged to do and consistently do is confront and alive, depending upon our legislators and what they're doing, support the ones like Rashida and the work that they're trying to do to really show the differentiation between fighting for human rights and what is anti-Semitic and what is anti-Palestinian or anti-Arab. But could you also touch on, because I know there's been a lot of pushback in DC, people might not understand the BDS, the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and that can be another way that people can help, and then maybe where we can get more of that information.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That is a great question. So boycott, divestment, and sanctions, it is a Palestinian call. It is a form of massive kind of global Palestinian and global and nonviolent resistance to Israeli colonialism and oppression. And the BDS movement has basically three principles, three goals. It calls for the end of the occupation of Arab lands, so the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and Gaza, ending the occupation. 2, equal rights for Palestinian citizens inside Israel, so end to the discriminatory policies there. And 3, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, millions of which are in exile and are denied the right. It is the human right to return to their homes and lands. So it's 3 goals that are based on human rights, international human rights, and humanitarian law. And so the Palestinian, they put out a call in 2005 as a coalition of 170 Palestinian organizations and unions and political parties that called on the world to engage in different forms of either boycotting products that come from this state of Israel, or products also that support in any way the Israeli military action and occupation and oppression. For example, Caterpillar is a big one. Caterpillar its products have been shipped over to Israel. Israel has been arming its bulldozers and using it in military operations, or using it to tear down, demolish Palestinian homes for years. A Caterpillar bulldozer was used to run over and crush American volunteer Rachel Corrie in 2003 while she was trying to protest the demolition of a Palestinian home. And Caterpillar has known for years, for decades now, that its products are being used to commit human rights violations in the occupied Palestinian territory, and they continue to sell their products. And so these corporations that know that Israel is using its products for human rights violations and do nothing about it, continue to engage in business. Those are also legitimate targets of boycott. Divestment, there have been different forms of divesting people. If you're in a college or university, or even if your state has Israeli bonds, are invested in any kind of Israeli products, there you can kind of do some research and campaign to get your school, your city, or whatever to divest from Israeli bonds or Israeli products, again, that support the Israeli occupation and colonial regime. And sanctions, of course, we are working on, put pressure on governments to sanction Israel. We're probably a little bit far from that, although every year for the past few years, there has been a resolution, or every Congress, let me say, so every 2 years, and just a few weeks ago, there was another resolution introduced in Congress by Congresswoman Betty McCollum. Let me see if I have it handy, the resolution number. I think it is, I don't know where it went. I had it up, I think it's 30. I had it up, I lost it. Sorry, I probably pull it for you, but Betty McCollum reintroduced her resolution that calls for no US funding. Of course, we give $3.8 billion to the Israeli military per year, and Betty McCollum's resolution wants to make sure that none of this funding goes towards the annexation of land, the demolition of Palestinian homes, or the torture and imprisonment of Palestinian children. Right now, there are no restrictions. Actually, let me back that up. There
I have
are, you got it?
Yeah, sorry, it took me a minute to find it.
There are restrictions. We'll give that number because it's really important. If you can call and write your member of Congress and ask them to sign on to this resolution so that we can get more co-signers. We can maybe hopefully move the resolution. There are actually laws on the US books that prevent US funding for being used to commit human rights abuses and to prevent US funding from being used to commit acts of aggression. However, they're not enforced when it comes to Israel. And therefore, what this resolution calls for is for there to be enforcement and there to be a mechanism put in place so that our tax dollars are not used to commit these rights abuses. It's simple. I think if it had to do with any other place in the world, it's a no-brainer that we don't want our tax dollars used to torture and imprison kids in military prisons. Every single year, about 700 Palestinian children are arrested and put in military detention, abused. Some are tortured, denied sleep, denied legal aid, denied the right to have their parents there when they're interrogated. And then they're imprisoned for months or years at a time, losing a lot of their childhood in a military system, which international human rights bodies have said does not afford basic due process. We're allowing our tax dollars to be used to put children as young as 12 through these systems, and 700 Palestinian children per year are treated like this and put through this system. It should be a no-brainer that we don't want our tax dollars used for this. But unfortunately, because it's Israel that is doing it, our members of Congress are tepid about it and don't sign on. But if they get enough calls and letters from us, hopefully they will. Do you have that number?
I put the link in the chat.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Thank you.
And David Hartzell, who I think is just leaning away. Yep, David has a question, and then after David, I have Dorothy.
Thanks so much, Huwaida. It's great to see you and hear you again.
Great to see you, David.
After a long time. And so sorry you didn't get elected to Congress. You've been a tremendous addition.
You know, the good thing about that, I don't want to interrupt your question, but the good thing about that is I don't feel like I lost because of Palestine. And I think I set hopefully and sent an important message that you don't have to tiptoe around Palestine in order to run for office. Because of my background, you know, the people around me, the campaigners thought, oh, you need to, you know, wipe your social media clean and all of these things. I said, I'm not backtracking on anything I've ever said. I think I'm pretty careful and accurate in the things that I say on social media, and I won't go back on any of that. And when we ended up doing a poll and asking at least the Democratic voters in my district what they thought about my position, it was more of a plus for me than a negative. And specifically, we posed the question, we said Huwaida would advocate for cutting aid to Israel based on its human rights abuses. Do you think that this is a strong reason to vote for her, a reason to vote for her, or not a reason to vote for her? And about 68 to 70% thought it was a reason or a strong reason to vote for me. So I hope more people, I don't know if I'll be running again, but I hope other activists won't shy away from it, because we need actually grassroots people that represent the people and that represent our morals and our principles to be running. Sorry, I interrupted you. Do you have a question, David?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. My question is, a Palestinian named Ali Abu Awad spoke here in San Francisco area the other day, and he, do you know him, by the way?
I don't know him personally. Yeah. I've heard of him though.
But anyway, his feeling or understanding is that both the Palestinians and Israelis, what they really want is security. And so he is working on building what he calls a Palestinian nonviolent movement to try to really make all Palestine with a deep a deep commitment to nonviolence, with no violence, etc. Which sounds like a dream. and then Israel would have no excuse whatsoever for how it's treating people in the West Bank and Gaza. I mean, do you know about this movement? I think it's called the Tahrir.
You know, I've heard about this for a while, and I don't want to be cynical, but I don't agree that this will give Israel like no reason or no excuse to use violence, because I've witnessed that they create excuses to use violence. For example, I've been involved in a number of marches, nonviolent marches or other actions. And when the Palestinians are they're never, the ones that I've been in, never with any Palestinian weapons. At most, some will deteriorate to, you know, when Israel fires at us or starts beating up people, some kids might start throwing rocks. But even in some of them where there was total control and no rock throwing, you'd have provocateurs on the other side invading and starting with the rock throwing, which would then descend into chaos. And then Israel has an excuse to use or it uses it as an excuse. You also have situations where, you know, Israel used to impose these basically demands that Palestinians refrain from any kind of violence for a certain set number of days before it would come to the negotiating table. This was the beginning of the Intifada. And it would go, basically, you'd have Palestinians meeting those demands, and at the last minute, you know, Israel would do something to provoke and then instigate. There's only so much that Palestinians can tolerate when you're living under the conditions that you're living in. And even in situations where Palestinians can be quiet for days or months, or and you'll report that, oh, well, there is no violence. Oh, it's quiet. Meanwhile, on a daily basis, the systemic violence continues. So when Palestinians aren't firing rockets or something like that, you still have Palestinian homes being demolished. You still have Palestinian movement restrictions. You still have like that video where Palestinians are subjected to daily violence and humiliation, and how, in order to meet some demand of the other side that we remain nonviolent while we continue to endure this. And again, it's set up so that even if we get close to meeting those demands, then there's an instigation or there's a provocateur, there's something to mess things up, so then you can say, oh, you didn't meet our demands, and so we're not going to negotiate with you. So as much as I believe in nonviolence, as much as I've been involved in something like that, to say that Palestinians being totally nonviolent is going to, you know, set the stage for Israel or not give an excuse for Israel to be violent, I don't think it's going to work that way. And also, David, many of, you know, throughout history, yes, our violent resistance is what usually is focused on, but so much of our resistance has been nonviolent. That didn't stop, you know, Israel's break their bones policies during the first Intifada. That didn't, it doesn't stop, you know, the number of Palestinians that have been killed in nonviolent protests. It, you know, I just, the explanation, the pretext for it is, I think it's flawed. And it tries to put the, you know, the colonizer and the colonized on the same level, which I think is kind of morally unjust. Do both sides want security? Yes. But does, you know, do those with the Zionist mentality, does this Israeli government, does this believe in security based on equal rights with Palestinians? No. The Zionist project believes that this land belongs to the Jewish people. And therefore, if we can't, without dismantling that, there is not going to be a way to get to a just peace where people can. Israel wanted security while it continues to to dominate the land. So it wanted security by Palestinians accepting subjugation, basically. That's what it is. And you can't have that without working to dismantle Zionism, because Zionism, I know that there are Jews that have different understandings of it, but the way that we understand it and the way that we are talking about it is the political movement that believes that this land belongs to the Jewish people. And when you have that supremacist ideology, then you want your security along with that. That means you want the other people there, the native people who live there, just accept subjugation, and then you can all be secure and peaceful, and that's not going to work. So I don't mean to be negative, but with enough experience of how and engage in Palestinian nonviolent resistance and seeing how Israel responds to that, that's not what I think it's going to take. I don't think that's going to work.
Thank you very much, Huwaida.
I know Dorothy Ritter had a question.
Yes, I was wondering, Huwaida, if you could speak to the current political climate. I mean, in the leadership of both Israel and Palestine. I mean, there's probably not any talks. I mean, maybe just speak to the Palestinian leadership with Gaza and the West Bank. Are they able to communicate, able to organize, able to strategize with the, with the inability for movement, for communication? How are the Palestinian people surviving under that? And where do they find hope? If you, I don't know, that's kind of a tough.
It is a tough question. Unfortunately, Palestinian quote unquote leadership is not providing much leadership, and they don't have the faith and the trust of the Palestinian people. Now, Israel and the United States tried to use that to say, well, Palestinians don't have a credible, legitimate leadership with which we can make peace with. But that has kind of always been the Israeli argument. We don't have anyone that we can talk to, or we don't have, when in reality, in Mahmoud Abbas, they probably had the best person that they could talk to, and yet they continually work to delegitimize him, and has led to a state where Palestinians have lost kind of all faith in their leadership, not only because there is internal corruption, but when they see their leadership can't protect them, but yet are forced to try to provide protection for Israel, for the occupiers, then that completely delegitimizes them in the eyes of the Palestinian people. Because the Palestinian leadership, the Palestinian Authority, is expected to coordinate security with Israel, which translates into ensuring Israeli security from any kind of Palestinian resistance. And yet when the Israelis invade Palestinian villages or towns or cities, the Palestinian forces, Palestinian Authority, the police, they aren't allowed or are not able to do anything. So they're left with very little legitimacy amongst the people. And then that's just compounded or used by Israel and the United States to say there is kind of nobody to talk to. There's long been a divide between the West Bank and Gaza. Communication or travel is impossible between the two. Families are divided. Families haven't seen each other for years because they live about an hour drive, but are not allowed to access, the other territory. So it is a very difficult situation, and this is one of the reasons that we or Palestinians call on the international community to be part of the Palestinian liberation movement, because it's very hard for Palestinians, when you consider the balance and the forces of power, to do it by themselves. I mean, they're staying steadfast. There's enormous effort to get Palestinians off the land, to move them, and they're staying steadfast. They're surviving in situations that is almost inexplicable to see or to understand how they're surviving, but they are, and that are calling on us around the world to not ignore them, not only pay attention when a resistance fire fires a rocket, because that's not it. That's extreme response, or a response to extreme repression, and the fact that nobody has been listening. So what do? I think that we continue to educate, to engage our members, our elected representatives, and if we can, are able to locally see what kind of boycott or divestment initiatives we can undertake, because that is a powerful civil society response to what's happening. And Palestinians will continue to stay steadfast on the ground and do what they can, but the situation is not, it's very difficult. I don't want to kind of paint it as rosy. It is very difficult, but it's not, it's not impossible in situations of extreme repression. I think the truth and justice will emerge. I don't think that this can continue for very long. And when we see what's the extent to which people are waking up, let me say, it is heartening, because there is millions and millions of dollars that is invested in propaganda here in the United States. And despite that, public opinion is shifting. So at least amongst, I hate to put this in political party terms, but the poll that was conducted last month that showed, for the first time ever amongst Democrats, more Democrats sympathize with Palestinians than with Israelis, 49-38. Historically, Palestine or support of Israel has been a bipartisan issue. That's not the case anymore. And well, maybe with our president, unfortunately, and some of our elected representatives, but that is changing, and that's changing through the grassroots work that we're doing. If we continue to build these coalitions with peace and justice movements and include Palestine in our organizing, I think that will continue to change powerfully.
One of the things that is in chat here from Anne is that in Florida there is an anti-BDS statute, which I know has been being promoted by Florida and others. Do you think that's going to catch on? I mean, that's a horrible thing to is that something we should be aware of to combat? Because I'm thinking about, Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu said that the apartheid in Palestine was worse than he had ever seen in South Africa. And it was things like yes, and talking to our legislators that I think helped turn the tide. So should we be watching for people to do what Florida has done?
There's an anti-BDS statute in Michigan too. There are actually about 32, if the number hasn't gone up, anti-BDS statutes. So in about 32 states across the country, some of them passed by the legislature, some of them by executive decree, like, in New York, Cuomo passed it by executive order, and in a couple other states where it didn't pass in the legislature, it was passed by executive decree. In the states where it has been challenged, now these anti-BDS statutes, what they do is they impose penalties on people that support BDS. And generally those penalties are in the form of state contracts. So for example, if you do not pledge that you will not engage in any kind of boycott of Israel, then you cannot have any kind of state contract. It's usually something like that. They have been challenged in a few states. And in the states where they have been challenged, for the most part, they have been declared unconstitutional, and they are unconstitutional. In Michigan, we haven't challenged it yet because there hasn't been a plaintiff. Basically, it hasn't been applied in a way that you can challenge it. But in the event that it is, if somebody, is harmed by it, then, I think we're waiting to challenge it in Michigan. And yeah, it's unfortunately, it's one of the ways I said millions of dollars are being spent here to kind of distort the narrative. And one of the ways that it's being, that money is being used is to lobby legislators to do things like this and to make any kind of organizing or speaking up or nonviolent actions like boycotting Israel. I mean, you can boycott US states, for goodness sake. You can boycott North Carolina, you can boycott Texas, but if you want to boycott Israel, then you get sanctioned for it by law. It's outrageous. But it also points to the kind of desperation, I think, the extent that they have to go through to keep people from speaking up, from rising up, from organizing. But when we challenge it, I think we win. When we challenge it, we do win. So we have to keep our eyes and ears open and keep challenging it.
Great. I know Kim Redigan has a question for you.
Hi, Huwaida. Thanks so much. So Huwaida, I'm really concerned about what happened at West Bloomfield School because I don't think it's a one out. I don't think it's an aberration. And I think it's part of, it's very much what we're, the anti-critical race theory thing that's going on in school districts, the anti-LGBTQ library books in school districts. How do we build a coalition of truth tellers and voices that refuse to be silenced? I mean, I hate to see anyone, I hate to see like Palestinian justice be siloed or CRT be siloed or LGBTQ be siloed. How do we build that coalition? Do you have any ideas?
You're right. I think that we can't be siloed. And I think it's historically as we have been building, but we need to do more. And especially within the Palestinian movement, I think we need to do more. We sometimes become so overwhelmed with everything that's happening in Palestine and, just responding to that. We don't make conscious effort enough. There is some, but not enough, I think, to also show up for others. And while that is changing, I think we need to, so this is a little bit of self-criticism. We need to make sure that we're showing up for others as much as we can and make sure that we are building those connections and building those connections between what's happening. It starts with showing up. So I know you guys with MPT, you do show up in different places and you're great at building those connections. So I think you need to tell us, Kim, rather than me, because you're really great at doing that but we just have to be more aware of it. And sometimes it gets overwhelming because there's so much to deal with, right? But it becomes, I think, a little bit easier when we can build those connections and spread it out a little bit. But do you have words of wisdom on that?
No, I wish I did. I'm deeply concerned about, as a teacher, right? I'm deeply, deeply concerned about, revisionist history across the board and across the board. It doesn't matter if it's Indigenous history. This is really a moment we're in, and I don't have answers except that I know that numerically we win. And, and that includes combating anti-Semitism, which is on the rise. All of this belongs together to me. And that's, I don't know. Wait, I wish I did have an answer.
Part of it too, I think it's continuing to speak out. For example, with what happened with Bloomfield Hills, one of the things that was said by those that were protesting me was that I made their kids uncomfortable. And that then threaten their safety. And it's the same thing we hear when we kind of talk about history, Native American, African American history here, and wanting to teach true history. It makes some people uncomfortable. I think we need to be unapologetic in saying we have to get uncomfortable. Because some people are very comfortable with the systems that continue to exist that oppress people. And if we are going to dismantle those systems, we have to get uncomfortable. So we can't continue to kind of expect that we just don't want to make people uncomfortable. And I saw a lot of that discussion in criticism over what Bloomfield Hills High School did. And continuing to speak up about it, I think is helpful. It draws more people's attention to it. Some people might not be aware that it's happening, but we can make them more aware that it's happening.
Any Anybody else have a question? Huwaida, I have another question. Sorry. But Pax Christi USA co-sponsored a showing, like a preview showing of this new documentary that's coming out called The Law and the Prophets. And I wondered if you had seen that yet. And I am like nowhere near your caliber of expertise. So I would want your like stamp of approval on it. But to me, it looked really powerful and boy, a really a wonderful way to get people to see and to talk. And I think the first obstacle we often have in getting people to take action on something is actually seeing the people and making the people real who are being affected by it. And so I think it did a good job. And so I'll put the link in the chat. But I think it's something that in the future, you know, if I'm not missing something, some undercurrent that's there that I'm not aware of, I think it could be a really good tool to have organizations co-sponsor showing it and getting people to talk about it and having dialogue about it. I think taking away some of the mystique that is owned by the people who are framing the conflict in the way that they want us to see it. I just read, actually I'm not done yet, but the George Lakoff book, Don't Think of an Elephant. Is anybody, and the idea of that it's just been redone. I don't know if people knew that, but he just like, you know, updated it and rewrote. And it's so powerful to think about how we can change people's minds by just the words and framing that we can talk about anything. And we have accepted, I think, the framing that we've been given, that Palestinians are terrorists, that Palestinians are ungrateful, that that Israel occupied a land that was unoccupied. It behooves all of us to really find out what's the truth, and then how do we talk about that truth in a way that encourages dialogue. So what are some other things that you would pass along on to us that can encourage that kind of social change that I'm really glad to hear you say that you're hopeful, because I think we need to be hopeful if we're going to keep going, you know?
Absolutely. I think I would, building on, you know, your point about the framing that we use, I think that that's an important point. For too long, for the last 3 decades, really, we have been sucked into this framing that talks about 2 states for 2 people. And we have discarded, in a sense, the human rights framework, that we should be aiming for not 2 states, but a political solution that ensures that everybody has their human rights respected, that everybody is able to live with equality and dignity. And the 2-state solution, it continues to be parroted by political leaders. That's kind of all we hear about whenever something comes up, with the 2-state solution and the 2-state solution, and we don't want to do anything that harms, you know, the possibility of a 2-state solution. Well, the 2-state solution never really was set up to ensure that there would be equality between the people there. Just to briefly explain, the 2-state solution is always talked about. It includes Israel's demand that it be recognized as a Jewish state. Now, if you're going to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, I said that my father is from a village that was there before Israel was created, on top of this village. And now we're Israeli citizens, but we're not Jewish, we're Catholic. And so if you want to, you want me to acknowledge and declare that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, that is sanctioning perpetual, forever discrimination against me because I'm not Jewish. It would be the same as asking everyone to recognize the United States, you know, as a white Christian country. And many people would argue that it still is, but officially it would be outrageous to say everyone needs to recognize this country it should be recognized as a country, as a state that has a, democracy, and that accords right to all its people, all people within its borders equally, not based on religion. And so I would urge people to get away from that kind of framework, and just like in any other situation where you have extreme oppression, if you're talking about colonialism, you're not talking about bringing the two sides to the table to talk about, how to negotiate colonialism. You're talking about decolonizing. You have apartheid, you need to talk about dismantling apartheid. And that's what we have here. So let's not get sucked into what those that try to pull us back into this two-state framework, because that takes us away from a human rights framework. We need to decolonize, we need to dismantle apartheid, and then we can talk about building a future system, whether 2 states, 10, or no states, that respects everybody equally. That's the future that we're aiming for. And your point about the films, there are lots of great films out there. I haven't seen this one. I hope I do. I think someone in the chat mentioned Boycott, which was one done by Just Vision about the, it's actually very good. Follow some of the cases that I talked about, and others that we can organize education and discussion around is just one way to continue kind of that education and awareness that could lead to mobilization. So I would highly encourage people to think about doing that in their communities.
All right, so I'm looking to see, I'm making sure there's no other hands raised. But so far, your words of wisdom, like for us going forward, are to continue to follow the story, to continue to talk to people, to engage with each other in groups, to constantly be pressuring our politicians for change, to employ boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and watch for opportunities to challenge that when possible, and to help each other stay informed and stay engaged in advocating for basic human rights. Did I leave anything out?
That sounds good to me. And as oh, there's my daughter popping into the screen there.
Hello.
And as much as you can, if you can travel to, sorry, there's my son also. Say hello. People that have been able to travel to Palestine have been forever changed, because no matter how much speaking we do here, explanation or videos that we watch, it doesn't convey the horridness of what's actually happening as much than being there, which is then contrasted by, you have this horrific situation that people are living under, and then you have the warmth of the Palestinian people that still somehow manage to maintain their humanity despite the dehumanizing situation in which they are forced to live. So that has left a profound impact on people. And so there are opportunities to travel to Palestine. There is an organization, Eyewitness Palestine. There is obviously a Meta Peace Team that organizes delegations, and then sometimes you can take the initiative and try to organize in your communities. People can certainly reach out to me if they need any help. And this is not to say that you have to go, but sometimes seeing it changes people forever and makes us all that more committed to making sure that we're doing all that we can to bring this situation, this injustice, to an end. And if you can't go, that's all right. You can, on social media and other ways, you can connect with people. Sometimes for Palestinians, it feels so isolated. Certainly having people come from outside is helpful, but also being able to making sure that they can connect with people outside through social media and other ways is powerful. And let's not underestimate what that does for the soul and for breaking this feeling of being completely abandoned. So I would only add that. Everything else you said is perfect.
And supporting the people. If you can't go, help support the people that can go. Because I know that when in a conversation with people and they say, well, I heard, you're being able to say, well, I saw. That puts a new connotation the struggle. So I just want to say thank you. And if people want to unmute their microphones so that you can hear the applause and appreciation, Huwaida, we cannot thank you enough for the time that you spent with us today.
Well, I thank you.
Namaste. Wow.
We're in
Great.
this
Thank you,
together.
Huwaida.
Thank you.
Huwaida.
Thank you.
Thanks.
God bless.
Yeah. And if we can ever do anything, you know where to get us.
Thank you. I appreciate you more than you know, your wonderful work. And thank you everyone for being here and for what you do. Sometimes, we might underestimate the things that we do and because the beast is so big, but every little
Yeah.
thing we do counts. And I think that we sometimes need to remind each other of that. So
Amen.
you help remind me of
Give
that.
a hug for us.
Yep.
Big
Thank
hug
you.
to Adam and the kids.
Yep.
I will deliver it. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Huwaida.
you.
Namaste.
See y'all next time.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.